Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here's your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning and welcome to Faith in Our Hometown. We hope you're having a great Sunday morning. This morning, my guest is going to be one of my good friends, Aaron Brown, who's the lead pastor over at St. Paul's United Methodist. Aaron, has been forever since we've recorded a show together.
Sure has been. It's been too long.
It has been. So we're going to be talking this morning. We're not actually always completely sure about what, but we think we're going to be talking a little bit about religion and violence. Sometimes those things interact because of people's beliefs and it erupts in violence. And so what do we think about that, and what might we do to be able to help that situation across the world? Because, on a Sunday morning, I'm hoping nobody's out there feeling too violent, but I'm hoping everybody's feeling inspired about something. So we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning and see whether or not we might be able to make a little bit of a difference in the world, calming a few things down and making the world a little bit of a better place. So thanks for joining us. We're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute. So please stay tuned, and I'll be right back with Aaron Brown right after our break.
Once I quit playing football, I still kept up with the eating, the amount of calories I wasn't exercising, so the weight started adding on. Dr. Lou is very knowledgeable in the work he does. He also has a program set up that has support systems in place for you. You'll go through the seminar at first. He'll give you the different examples of surgeries you can have to see which one works best with you. He will also sit down with you and discuss the options, what he feels, but he'll work with you the entire time. Mercy has their gastric bypass program here. They have all kinds of resources and support systems in place. They want to see you succeed, and they're here to help you the entire time, even after the surgery.
Well, I'm back with Faith in Our Hometown with my good friend Aaron Brown. Aaron's over at St. Paul's United Methodist. And so, Aaron, it's been a long time since we had a chance to talk. I keep hearing good stories about you from across town. So that's all good.
I'm curious. What
that's good. Well,
have you heard?
Just a few little things about, he gave this homily and it was so good. And, so I'm like, so it's good. So I know the competition's good out there, and that's a good thing. I like it. And I also heard a great story about one of those things where you're out helping build a house and, or helping repair a house, and some lady new in town and said, well, I'm Methodist and I'm looking for a church, and they were able to just go drag you over and talk to her. Now that's service, my friend. That is service. I was kind of impressed.
What are we supposed to be doing out there? Serving. Faith without works is dead.
That's one of those books that don't usually get quoted by a lot of people who aren't necessarily Catholics, but I'm glad, it's a great book.
James, right?
James, yeah. It's in that section of the Bible that everybody wants to fight over all the time. So fighting, there we go. There's our segue into this morning.
Good job. Great segue.
We do what we can some days, But sometimes people get so upset over those things, like, well, which books are in the Bible and which aren't? And why does your version have this and ours doesn't? And all that kind of good stuff. That they come to violent solutions to some of that stuff, and we don't have to, we can go back as far as the 16th century and see some of the wars that broke out even just in the Christian family when we started to disagree over some certain things. Those were not glorious moments in our history, as Christians, but we find out that they erupt even still today over different things, differences of belief and those kinds of things. Just a few weeks ago in Charlottesville, we had horrible violence, again, over people's beliefs about the way things are unfolding in the world and people being dissatisfied. And I just think there comes a time when we as people of faith need to reason with our own kind and say, is that the way we want to respond? Is that the way we want to respond?
Well, you talk about violence. I think violence is always stemming from something, right? And isn't that ultimately fear? When we have a fear of the other, whoever that other is, someone of another faith, someone of no faith, someone of a different sexual orientation, whatever that might be, that there is that fear of the other. And when fear becomes the operating principle of how we make decisions, I think the outcomes are always bad.
Yeah, and even if I do think that is one of the things that we always need to help people to get over is fear, because I don't know that at least my God, my Jesus, even wants us to do a lot of fear. I don't think I don't think our best responses usually come out of fear. You know, Jesus never threatened anybody. Instead of, you don't do it this way, he was more kind of, you know, this is my life, this is the way I'm living, and I'm inviting you to the same thing.
Yeah.
Would you like to come and follow me?
Much more
Would you like to
carrot
come do this?
than stick.
Exactly. I think so. At least that's my interpretation. And I know there are other Christian brothers and sisters out there who disagree with me on that.
Yeah, Jesus did say some harsh things, some difficult things.
He was tough from time to time, but I'm saying it was more carrot than stick. You know, but even knowing that, even if I think that something needs a stick, does that mean I pick one up and smack somebody with it because they're not doing it? I mean, you know, so in other words, even how do I respond to violent people? How do I do that? You know, and we've argued for years, and even in the Catholic faith, about, you know, is violence ever, is war ever okay? Is retaliation ever okay? You know, we argue about those things because again, you can interpret Jesus' words different ways.
Where is the line? Oh, back to the issue in Charlottesville. I don't know that in my limited understanding of all the motivations behind everybody that's involved, I don't know that this is I'd put it in a religious conflict of people with religious values battling one another, and maybe that's naive on my part.
I don't think that was the primary thing, but I figured this morning we'd at least tie it in with how do we respond, because I do think that there have been cases similar where people, like for example, you know, there were stories around years ago about a Catholic going and shooting an abortionist, okay? And, you know, we just had to come right out and condemn that. It's just like, wait a minute, stop. We disagree with abortion, and we don't think the abortionist is doing the right thing, but does that give us the right to go out and shoot somebody because we think he's doing something wrong?
Right, and the answer is no. Right, and we talk about different forms of violence. Abortion is a form of violence, and I think I don't know. You brought that up. You know, talk about that in one sense. My personal belief is that the question around abortion relates back to Jesus saying, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me." And who could be more of a stranger than an unborn child? In that, you know, some of the questions about when does life begin, when does humanity, in my mind, those are secondary questions to, are we prepared to welcome the stranger in the process? Welcome Jesus. And I think that the same thing, in some sense, correct me if I'm wrong here, applies to the stranger who might be someone of the other, the fear of the other, the person of another faith, the person of no faith, the person of a completely different belief system.
Yeah, and that's again back to where that fear comes in, because that's really what's, I think, blocks so many people from being able to welcome somebody who's different. You know, is just that fear that somehow I'm not going to be okay, or something's not going to be right, or I'll be harmed, or even my faith is going to be harmed. You know, or even what I believe in or I hold dear is going to be harmed. You know, and I get the part that, for example, this gentleman in Charlottesville, I mean, you know, again, was not, you know, I don't think it was religion, you know, in effect, but I mean, it was that whole business about my way of life. Is my way of life going to be threatened? Has it been threatened? Is somebody doing me harm? Is somebody doing, you know, violence to me in a different way? And then somehow twist that whole thing to say, well, then it's okay for me to go out and to do this to somebody else because I'm fearful, or I'm afraid, or I want what I want and I want it back.
Isn't the Christian way, at its heart, being more prepared to die than to kill? Aren't those passages of Scripture that talk about, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with who? Everybody.
Yeah.
As far as it depends upon me, live at peace with everyone. And you know, I take those Scriptures seriously because there was a depth when they were written that relates to today. You know, 2,000 years ago, there was probably a lot more diversity in the culture that Paul was writing from than there is today. And yet he said, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with everyone, the people that are around you. And The way Paul approached people that were different from him, Paul being, the go-to guy in Scripture. The most of our New Testament scriptures are written by Paul. What did he talk about, and how did he approach people of different faiths or no faith? He said, "Hey, I see that you have a religious leaning," and he talked to the people of Athens. "I see you have a religious leaning. I see that you're longing to know beyond the natural into the supernatural."
A great evangelizer. He figured out how to connect.
Quoting, the philosophers that he saw around him, and saying, "Hey, this God, I saw a temple to, or a statue to an unknown God. Let me tell you about
this
unknown God." And that was his point of jumping off. Not, "You got it wrong. I'm going to beat my rightness into you." And Christians have gotten that part wrong throughout the centuries too.
And we all have. And I don't care which branch of Christianity you're looking at. As from the minute we started to split it up, we've all had plenty of I think guilt to bear for some of the goofy ways that we've tried to make our point and make it right, and even in our best moments, even trying to put it back together again. We've had some moments that I think we're all probably not proud of.
Yeah, well, there was a time when you and I probably wouldn't be sitting at a table together. As a Catholic and as a Protestant.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably about 75 years ago, maybe in the U.S. But we would have, we'd have looked at it respectfully and said, "Well, they're very nice people, but they're wrong." And
again, we would have protested because we're
of course, because we were. Well, there you go. and I would have stayed on my lofty high horse and just said, "They're very good people, but we don't go there." And we had a lot of that. I mean, I still, when I'm talking to folks today, who were taught by their families, just said we don't hang around those people. They're not our kind. Not our kind. I know a lot. My own family was like that. Branches of my family wouldn't want to deal with other branches for that reason. And I just think that I grew up as a kid even thinking it was silly. Just watching the way they did some of that. Now that was a couple generations ago, but I still watched, some of my great, aunts, go to, in effect, go to war. Now they didn't resort to violence, but they were basically going to war.
Yeah, your great aunts?
Great aunts, yeah.
Wow.
Because that was just some of those things that were just done, and it was just like, and my mom remembered as a kid, sometimes being the pawn because she was the Catholic kid, but that she went to Sunday school on Sunday mornings with her aunt as well, and it was just that that kind of playing back and forth, kind of competing for the kid, kind of like, no, come this way, no, go this way, no, come this way, no, go that way.
Was there violence involved in that?
Well, there was I think there was a little emotional violence, even if it wasn't physical.
Interesting.
Because they were both, when one would get her aside, they were, they're wrong. Well, they're wrong. And it's like the thing we do to kids, and it's violence in its own little way. And again, I don't blame either one for thinking they had the truth. I don't blame either one for thinking that they had the right way to do it, because if you think you got the right way to do it, how do you pursue that? You do. And I get that. I have no problem. I have no problem defending my faith. I have no problem, when somebody comes up and takes an issue with us or something, I do it. But how do I do it? If I, can I teach the kid that, that violence is not good by smacking the kid? Is that the right way to go?
Spank you for being violent.
I'm going to spank you for being violent, yes. That will teach you how not to do that. Or it's just like a few years ago, it's just like somebody bit one of their kids because the kid was biting somebody. So I'm going to show you how it feels. And I'm like, what are you going to do?
I've heard that parenting technique.
Well, thank you. That's one more reason I'm not a parent. So at any rate, we're going to be right back after a quick break. This is Faith in Our Hometown. Don't go away.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
So thanks for staying with us this morning. Again, my guest, Aaron Brown from St. Paul's United Methodist. Aaron, it's good to always have you with us.
Great to be here.
So we're talking about a little bit about religion and violence. So let's go back to Charlottesville for a second, okay? Charlottesville a few weeks ago was just one of those moments that I hope left people of all faiths shaking their head going, this isn't the answer. The violence can't be the answer. How do we do that? How do we get that message out there? What do we do? What was your response as a person of faith?
first of all, it is to step back and try and say, what am I seeing, not just what am I feeling? Because I react so harshly to white supremacist talk, language, anytime I see symbols of Nazism, I react very emotionally, and I've got to step back and say, okay, what it really is happening here, and think that through. And I know some people can think much faster than I can, but in what I try and do is say, okay, what am I seeing here? How do I name this? And I try and look at it through, I can't help but look at it through the lens of a follower of Jesus, trying to do that the best that I can. And when I see something like that, I have to name it through that lens, and I name that as evil. And I have to say that what I see in those acts of white supremacy and not neo-Nazism is evil, that it is racist, that it is so bigoted and hateful and destructive and cancerous, that when I hear language around, well, what we need is just unity around this, I think, well, how can we talk about unity? In my mind, something like that is like saying, well, I have cancer in my body and I just want all my cells to get along. I don't think that is how I would address that if I had cancer in my body. I would address that, getting it out of my body. And I'm not trying to stretch that metaphor too thin there.
No, works for me.
But I just think to number one, name it. And I think as Christians, one of the things it comes back to, and I'm not sure what your baptismal covenant is or the language that Roman Catholics use around baptism, but I imagine it's pretty similar. I just copied this off quickly. Our traditional questions of someone being baptized are, do you renounce this? It begins this way. Do you renounce the spiritual forces of wickedness? Do you reject the evil powers of this world and repent of your own sin? And I think that says it so much right there, that we address the evil, not just that is in ourselves, that is within me, right? And I have to repent of that, but I also have to work against the evil that I see around me and work for justice. But that gets to the question that we talked about in the first segment of violence. Do I feel like I have permission to be violent against those who are violent toward me? And Christians are going to answer that differently, right? And the way I answer that is no, I do not have permission to be violent to those who are violent toward me. I wouldn't necessarily call myself
I think that would have to be the last resort. I mean, the absolute last resort. I mean, I'm not, we can argue about whether Jesus was a pacifist or not, but even in the light of his own death, he didn't want anybody to fight back. Which again, just when we really come to the core of that, it's startling for us because none of us, we all would believe. I mean, and I know that if somebody came up and attacked me, I know I'd defend myself. I mean, I wouldn't just stand there. I mean, I know that. I think that that's the normal response. I still sometimes wonder what Jesus is trying to get us to figure out in all of that. But of course, we want to defend ourselves. We want to defend what we think is true and what is right and good. But I would have to say that resorting to violence ought to be the last resort. So how do we deal with like for example, white supremacists? I try to ignore them. Try to give them as little platform as possible. So, I mean, what they'd have been, I think absolutely, what would have been a little devastating to them is if they had their little rally and nobody else showed up to do anything. Because it would just be like, oh, we only have 3 people here listening to us today. Because I really believe that when we speak the truth is going to draw people because it's true. And I really believe that in so many instances, that kind of untruth, and I'm going to call it that, that I'm better than you are because of the color of my skin, or that I'm better than you are because I have money, or I'm better than you are because I'm a man and not a woman, or any of those. I just think we got to always speak the truth to those kinds of distortions, and not, but not give them a whole lot of attention, which I think is tricky. So how do you do that? How do you speak the truth to something but not, engage it in that, in a violent way?
That's a question for somebody smarter than me. I think.
I'm just saying, I don't have the answer either.
But I think also...
And I'm not saying I'm smarter than you are, though.
It's a... You don't have to. I know you are. But I think it's also acknowledging in the most basic level that within every human being is the image of God. Mm-hmm. And even when I think it's a journey of faith to when you look at anyone, for me, this is my journey of faith, when I look at anyone, people that I radically disagree with, people that I look at and I can say that is evil, that what that person is doing is evil, still within that person is the image of God. Mm-hmm. And I suppose that part of my job as a pastor is to help all people in that regard, to say, even if you hate people of color, which I just can't agree in any sense with, right. How can you deny the fact that within them is an image of God? And I suppose that, there's an atheism that would say, there's no image of God there. But again, I reject that.
But still on a humanistic grounds, could still agree with that and say, there's something inherent about the dignity of the human person that still needs to be respected.
Right. But what, and that is a position that, I can say, that's good. But when I hear people using the scriptures that I try and live by and using the name of the Jesus that I follow to justify hatred and bigotry, racism, there's a part of me that just cries out, this cannot be.
Well, and I do think that that's why political leaders, I think that's why religious leaders, all of us in our own purviews need to continue to stand against that kind of thinking, because as to use the example that you used earlier about there's a cancer growing, you gotta in some ways nip that in the bud, because without being confronted, without being challenged, without people of faith saying, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't represent our way of doing things, because again, if somebody now wants to give the this gentleman, the death penalty for killing somebody else, I'm still going to jump into the middle of that and say, I don't think that's the answer.
The death penalty.
I don't think that's the answer. I don't think that's. I don't think we can confront violence with violence and have it solve anything. And so how do we do that? How do we still decry the hatred, but at the same time not let it make us hateful?
Yeah.
And I think that's a continual challenge for a Christian.
Yeah.
That's a continual challenge, and I think that again, Jesus is always trying to respond to violence with love, and that's superhuman. Yeah. I think the human response is to want to just lash back.
Yeah.
But I think the superhuman response is to return violence with love.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
saw
a
a hat I should have bought years ago. It said, "I love haters." I thought, wow, how hard. What a simple but difficult thing.
Yeah, and it is. It is a challenge to love haters.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you. I think we have to decry the message of the white supremacist, but how do I still love the white supremacist, even in the midst of all of that that's going on?
Right, absolutely.
Because
you strive to see the image of God within all people.
Mm-hmm. And that's a challenge. Because because again, you don't want to, you want to just smack them, and I get that, I really do. I have to confront that in my own person, because it's just like, I want to, but and it's always because the challenge in my life is that I'm always, even with my words, training in the seminary was in verbal repartee and wit. So if somebody attacks you verbally, your best defense is get them back, right then and there, or turn that on them and get them. And I was in some ways trained in that. In terms of being that person of wits. But I got to tell you, there's a challenge in being quick. And the challenge is that sometimes you're really visiting evil with evil rather than visiting evil with love. And how do you let that go and turn the other cheek. I mean, and Jesus, even in terms of turning the other cheek, there's a lot of interpretations with that. But one of them just said, Jesus said, some of the people who said, in that Aramaic sense of things, he was really trying to point out the strangeness of the act. Saying, well, offer them the other cheek, and then they're going to be like, what? Then it's going to point out the idiocy of them slapping you in the first place.
It was meant to humiliate the slapper.
Right.
That phrase,
right.
Because the first slap was always a backhanded slap. The second slap was always a forehanded slap, which made you confront face to face the person you were slapping.
There's a story that just came through my mind about a woman who, when they were first doing the civil rights marches and protests in the way back in the 60s, and this woman came up and somebody on the other line spat in her face, and she was standing there in the line just holding the line with her children, and she looked at him and she said, "What, sir? Nothing for the children." And in that moment, wow. That was that turning that around. Well, we're sitting here this morning trying to figure out some sense to how do we respond to violence as people of faith. How do we do that, and the challenges that are involved with that? So we are going to be right back after this Mercy Minute, so stick around. Again, my guest this morning has been St. Paul's.
Rename
Aaron from St. Paul's.
There we go.
United Methodist Church, and so we're going to be right back, so stick around.
The SANE program, or Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner program, is a program established to provide a coordinated, specialized care to patients or women or men who've been the victim of sexual assault.
The SANE program is really designed to be a collaborative community response to sexual assault.
It's really important to make sure that it's not just the report or the forensic, but they get all of the testing that might be needed for their health.
It's also important to know that you don't need to know if you want to press charges or not. We don't get law enforcement involved unless you request it.
I just want to express to the victim that it is never your fault. You always have the right to say no, and that it's your body. So if you say yes one time, it doesn't mean every time.
I think it's important that sexual assault victims remember they've been victims of a crime, and crime victims do not pay for those services.
Well, thanks again for joining us for another Sunday morning on Faith in Our Hometown. I always laugh when somebody says, "Oh, we watch your show." And I'm like, you need to do something better on Sunday morning. You ought to be in church. No, just kidding. But thanks for being with us, and thanks for being part of our faithful viewership for the show. My guest this morning has been Aaron Brown from over at St. Paul's Methodist, and we've been just kind of batting back and forth this morning. How do we respond to the issue of evil in the world? How do we respond to violence? How do we respond to these things that grow so quickly and so often in our midst when they're unconfronted? But how do we confront them in ways that really work? How do we confront them in ways that don't beget more violence? But how do we confront them in ways that might transform the world with a little bit of love? It's a real challenge, and so good luck with that this week. I'm going to try my best as well. Thanks for joining us again, and join us next week for Faith in Our Hometown.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.